You are listening to The Memory Keeper by Evan Vaile. Chapter 17.
Ratboy stood with his chest puffed out proudly, watching his soldiers drag themselves up the last of the climb and flop onto the ground, exhausted. Caliper lifted the blue drum from his muscular shoulders and thumped it down, sucking in lungfuls of the stale air of the demolished subway platform. It was without a doubt the worst air he'd ever breathed, but it tasted wonderful. Young, healthy, and free, he helped Slayer maneuver the other blue drum to the ground, and then the pair clapped each other on the back, rejoicing. Roan and Styles followed, bearing the weapons and torches, and then came Shady Atkins and Guill O'tine. The Frenchman laid the director's severed head on the ground with the care a young girl would lavish on her favorite doll, then sat down himself. Their burning torches revealed only a fraction of the destruction they'd caused, but they exclaimed at the panorama before them. Scores of mutilated bodies littered the floor of the cavern, much as they had filled the trains, but in far worse condition. Limbs were scattered everywhere, and seemingly no 2 feet were a matching pair. Magnifique, Jill breathed, soccering a severed foot into the darkness. Unbelievable, Slayer agreed. A quiet minute passed, each of the 7 alone with his thoughts and burning lungs. When they were sufficiently recuperated, they collected their weapons and gathered around the enormous hole in the floor, staring down at what once had been their prison. The leading carriage of the train jutted out, and through the broken window they could see its driver squashed flat in his seat. Shady adjusted the power setting on the shotgun in his hands. "I'm glad I lived to see the day when the program was brought to its knees," he stated. Slayer was seated comfortably on one of the blue drums. "If hitting the program with a train is called bringing it to its knees, then what we're about to do must be nothing short of breaking its back." "Amen to that," Roan said. Styles had long since discarded his tie as a silly invention, wondering who in their right mind would want to wear a dumb strip of cloth around their neck. "Do you think the Deacon got out okay, Rats?" he asked. Ratboy gazed into the hole, his focus far distant. "Yeah, he's out," he answered finally. "For sure." "Do you think we're ever going to meet him?" Roan asked. "I don't know," Ratboy replied. "If I ever meet Loco again," Slayer grunted, "I'm going to break his back." Caliper was seated on the other blue drum, the big man a mirror image of Slayer. "Freaking A. When I yelled at him that I would take my cut, I wasn't only talking about the extra stuff he stole. I was talking about his balls too." Guillotine snorted up a green goober in his throat and spat it into the monster hole. They all watched it sail away into the darkness. "We're all part of history, you know," he mused. Shady chuckled. "You heard what the director said. We're top secret history." "History is about to hear a whole lot more from me," Ratboy said. "I'm going to be about as top secret as Jack the Ripper." "And as popular," Slayer added. Ratboy shrugged. "Bad publicity is better than no publicity." "Just leave some space in the newspapers for me," Shady said. "And me," Caliper grunted. The remainder of the company staked their own claim on the unwritten pages of future newspapers, and they all began to chuckle at their little joke. "Well," Shady said, clapping his hands together and rubbing them vigorously, "how about we light this place up, gentlemen?" Slayer nodded and hopped off the drum. "Let's do it. Any last words, Rats?" Ratboy stood deathly still, his dark eyes fixed on the darker hole. His laughter of moments ago faded from his face, and his manner became despondent. "No," he said. "No last words. Let's just blow this place and get out of here." Slayer and Caliper picked up the 2 blue drums with grunts and climbed concrete blocks to high positions on either side of the train. There they waited, the muscles in their arms rippling, holding the barrels over their heads. Ratboy, Shady and Guillotine leapt up onto the top of the lead carriage, shotguns in their hands, which were charged and ready to fire at maximum power. Roan cast his flaming torch in, and they all watched it illuminate the various levels as it bounced along the silver length of the train wreck. "Let 'em go, boys," Ratboy screamed. Slayer and Caliper lobbed the blue drums into the gaping hole, one after the other. Each throw was perfect. The drums bounced down the body of the train like basketballs down a steep bitumen road. Ratboy waited until they were almost lost to the darkness, then called it. "Blast 'em!" he cried. 3 bright blue tongues of electricity lanced through the air with a terrific crack. That knocked Slayer and Caliper from their concrete podiums. They fell to the ground happily, then stuck their fingers in their ears and scrambled back up to see what happened. The enormous cavern was illuminated with the momentary brilliance of a lightning strike as the shock guns poured energy in the direction of the bouncing drums. Ratboy's and Guill's shots were wide of the mark, burning long holes in the top of the train, and nothing more. Guill sheared the director's body in half down at level 6, and he cheered until Ratboy glared at him angrily. It was true that Shady was the best of them with the shotgun. Howling over the shriek of the electricity, he blasted the nearest rebounding drum with a superbly accurate shot, then took aim at the other one. The blue barrel exploded in a gigantic orange ball of flame, setting off a chain reaction that detonated the remaining jumping drum and the 24 stationary ones on level 4. To the 7 young men standing at the gaping hole, it sounded as if a nuclear bomb had gone off. They stared in awe at the wall of fire, which rocketed straight up the length of the train, incinerating everything in its path. Concrete and steel were scorched and melted. Flesh and bone were reduced to ash on the fiery wind. The explosion roared through every level of the facility, leaving nothing untouched, annihilating every scrap of evidence that people had ever existed down there. What was left of the mainframe computer was fused to the concrete, its information never to be recovered. The isolation cells were roasted, any equipment obliterated, until all that remained was blackened concrete and empty corridors. When the train began to collapse into the hole, the 3 standing atop its carriage jumped to safety. Not a moment too soon, because the next instant the ball of flame was ejected through the hole, burning everything it touched. Crouched on the ground behind a large concrete block, Ratboy watched the train groan and slip backward into the hole like the Titanic sinking into the dark Atlantic Ocean. It was magnificent to hear the carriages crashing through the levels below. Gloating, he glanced around to check on the others. Just as Reece Nylander was clambering up the last meters of concrete rubble, did he feel the ground rock with the force of the explosion. There was a roar of hot air past him as the atmosphere in the facility was forcibly expelled. And then, a moment later, he saw the unholy inferno rising to engulf him. In the nick of time, he scrambled out of the fissure in the subway platform floor, flinging himself away from the rising inferno. The fire was so close, he thought he could see the soles of his boots melting, so he retreated from the crack in the floor, keeping to the shadows lest he be seen by one of Ratboy's crew. The bandage around his chest had been scraped off during the climb, and he'd lost the torch. As he moved, he was only too aware that a confusion of bodies was scattered among the rubble. His gifted eyes informed him that the cavern was filled to the brim with soul memories. The tiny stars were everywhere, intermixed, drifting through the air on intangible currents of wind. He unavoidably touched a few. Seeing so many lives and untimely deaths in absolute detail required courage he didn't possess. One of the soul memories soon trembling inside his mind was that of a young woman named Carol Kenny, a lawyer who worked in the city. Hers was just one of many. Reece knew that the soul memories he didn't touch would float down there forever, to the end of time, waiting to be found and remembered. The fracture in the floor was still exclaiming fire, and sufficient orange light for him to navigate his way past the others. Every so often he heard a shout, and by the calls he counted 7 of them in the cavern with him. 7 of them, 1 of him, the kind of odds that meant he wanted to avoid an entanglement. He merged with the shadows and circled around the excited shouts, contemplating the soul memories as he worked his way toward the twisted escalator. When he arrived at it, he eyed it unhappily. The bottom half had been swept away, and he would have to make a jump for the lowest remaining step. With so many soul memories gently raining down like crystal snowflakes in the air, the whole cavern was filled with a soft silver light. Reece checked on the position of Ratboy and the others, then stood up and leapt for the stationary escalator. His hands clamped onto steel, and with his considerable strength, he hauled himself up. The remainder of the steps posed little problem, and within moments he stood in the darkness of the next level. Navigating blind through the deserted subway station was no easy task, and standing there wondering how many deep dark holes there were to fall down, Reece immediately begrudged the loss of his torch. Somber was the thought that he had escaped from an underground prison only to be lost in another underground prison. But after a minute's walking with both arms carefully outstretched, he found the next escalator and ascended its metal steps 2 at a time. Then he heard the hum of activity coming from up ahead and realized the exit must be near. He experienced his first taste of freedom as a shopping list of sensations. There were the lights, red and blue, flashing over the walls and illuminating his way. A cool night breeze tickled across his shaved head. He'd already heard the buzz of activity from beyond. He tried to distinguish the sounds, but couldn't. The air smelt crisp and clean. He hurried toward it, up the last steps, remembering suddenly what had been his so long ago and what had been taken from him. He emerged from the warm, dark tunnel into a confusion of noise and brilliant light. In years to come, he would reflect that it probably was a little like being born again. Bright lights blinded him, and then waiting hands reached out and conveyed him along. He heard whispered words of encouragement, but his mind was too dazed to understand. When his eyes adjusted to the new environment, he saw that police cars and fire trucks had cordoned off the entire entrance, creating a large vacant area through which he was being moved. 2 helicopters hovered in the sky. Spotlights waved about the entrance, searching for more survivors. And beyond the police cars, he saw a crowd of onlookers milling around. He glanced at the men holding him. Or were they helping him? Yes, they were helping him, he was sure. The hands had a compassion that the guards' hands in the program always lacked. The men were wearing bulky yellow uniforms and helmets that identified them as firefighters. Reece saw that neither was armed with a weapon, and so relaxed a little. The fireman passed him to the care of a female doctor with blonde hair and attentive eyes. She looked him up and down before guiding him to a stretcher. As he sat down, the hems of his pants lifted up over the top of the guard's black boots that he was wearing. He looked up and kept on looking, staring at the beautiful dome of night sky arching over the tops of the skyscrapers. So enamored was Reece with the vista that he was completely insensible to the young woman's questions. She tapped him on the hand to get his attention. "Hey, how do you feel?" she asked. "Are you okay?" Reece nodded, reading the name on her identification badge, Dr. Emily Maron. "I'm okay," he said. "Are you in any pain?" she asked. Reece nodded. "My shoulder." Dr. Maron moved behind him and out of his field of view. He felt her warm hands carefully examine the wound without causing him any further distress. "There are stitches in this," she said. "This is a pre-existing injury." Reece let his eyes roam around the area, taking in all that was going on, before returning his attention to the stars overhead. "Yes," he replied, without offering an explanation. "All right," she said. "It looks okay. There's been some additional bleeding, but you're not going to bleed to death." Dr. Maron moved back around the stretcher and faced her patient. Quite strangely, he was still staring up at the stars with a dreamy, childlike expression on his face. While his gaze was diverted, she took the opportunity to appraise him, not as a doctor would, but as a woman. He was muscular without being bulky, and rather handsome behind the grime and dirt on his face. He had the most striking blue eyes, in the rare event that they were looking at her. There was something sage in them, something she couldn't quite explain. Her scrutiny fell to the boots he was wearing. "They are some pretty big kickin' boots," she observed. "And with a haircut like that. Are you a green suitor?" Reece looked at her and frowned. Are you in the army?" she added. "Oh, no," he replied. Emily shrugged, pulling a small flashlight from her pocket. She played the white spot around in both of his eyes until she was satisfied with what she saw. After that, she pressed a stethoscope against his chest and back. Then she waved one finger back and forth, instructing him to track it with his eyes. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. "Sitting outside the subway station on a stretcher, beneath the Melbourne night sky," he replied. "Good," Emily said, smiling. "Do you know why?" Reece kept his voice even. "There was an accident in the station." "Yes," she said. "Can you remember anything about what happened down there?" Reece blinked, looked away. Could he remember? In his mind were a dozen soul memories from a dozen eyewitnesses to the disaster. He could remember the incident from 12 different perspectives, and with a level of detail that historians could only dream about. He saw the train hurtle into the panicked crowd, killing everything in its path. Could he remember? He could never, ever forget. Reece looked back at her, and Emily had that feeling again that there was a lot more going on behind those blue eyes than their owner was admitting. "I was waiting at the platform for a train," Reece began, telling the story from the perspective of Carol Kenny, whose memories were fused in among his own. The train stopped as usual, and everybody started getting on. Then I heard the roar of another train coming down the tunnel, but I thought it must have been just me mishearing. But then it shot out at full speed and collided with the stationary train. After that, there's just chaos. Okay, Emily said. Don't think about it now. Were you part of the big group that came out about 10 minutes ago? Reece looked her. What group? He asked carefully. They all had haircuts like yours, the doctor explained. Maybe 100 of them around the same age as you. Reece considered what she had said. 100 inmates was virtually the entire population of the program. Where did they go? He asked. Well, Emily sighed. The first paramedics onto the scene were busy dealing with the most serious injuries, and in the confusion, the skinheads, the group, just sort of disappeared. Reece nodded. There was little point in explaining the situation to her, and it would just make trouble for himself. I don't know who they were, he said. She seemed satisfied with that answer. All right, can you tell me your name? Reece, he began, then hesitated. If he identified himself to the authorities, it would be that much easier for them to track him down. Emily raised her eyebrows. Reece? She prompted. Can't remember? Reece frowned in his best unstudied attempt at perplexed concentration. No, he said finally. Do you remember where you live, Reece? She asked. Another Oscar-winning performance. No, he stammered. Emily had her flashlight out again and was pointing it at his eyes with a concerned expression creasing her forehead. She could find nothing problematic there, so made an examination of his skull for head trauma she'd missed on the first pass, but his head appeared to be undented. Okay, she mused. Do you have any ID on you? Reece's standard-issue prison pants contained no pockets, a measure which prevented the inmates concealing nasty items. No, I was carrying a bag, and it was in there. Emily said, tapping the penlight against her lips. Can you remember any of your next of kin? Mother, father, brothers or sisters? Reece had a vague recollection of his foster family from years ago. Whether they had abandoned him or been tricked into abandoning him, he wasn't sure, but it didn't matter anymore. Wherever they were, they couldn't help him. The doctor's innocent question suddenly made Reece realize just how alone he was in this overground world. No, he said finally. Don't worry, Emily said gently. I'm sure your memory will return in a short period of time. I'll get you to lie down now, on your chest. We're going to take you to the hospital where the doctors will sew your shoulder up. Reece lay down on the soft stretcher. Emily turned away to talk to a colleague. When she turned back, the stretcher was empty. She looked around the area in alarm, but there was no sign of the patient. Reece was gone.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.